I feel that Stockton and Malone, by most people's standards that I'm hearing nowadays, they're underrated because people talk about them like they're trash. No, you're shaking your head. Like every time you bring up Malone, all they talk about is what he did off the court.
Right.
The youngins.
I can talk about what he did on the court.
And no one talks about what he did on the court.
I can.
I know you can, but I'm just saying, I feel like
I can too.
Not you guys, the majority of people, I feel underrate those two guys right now.
He's overrated in my opinion.
What do you think? When you say Malone is what's properly rated for Malone?
Yeah. Is he not a top 30
to say that he's overrated, that sounds nuts to me. I think he's a top 20 player all time.
He said 20.
I think he's a top 20 player all time.
I have him outside of my 20. I have him top 30.
So you would say that he's overrating him?
It depends on where.
I got him at 17.
He got him at 17. So that's overrating him, correct?
I think it's a little overrated.
That would be a little overrated.
So he's overrated.
I think he's top.
But I don't think most people have him top 20.
Yeah, they don't. He didn't win a ring, so they're not gonna have him that high. But I have him in my top 25 when I choose to rank him.
There you go.
When you choose to. I got my top 30. Really, the Malone thing is just the playoff dropping is absurd. And then also Stockton just gets, like the gentleman we saw earlier today, gets way too much praise and conversation just off of stats that never really led much to. I mean, led to some success, but not enough to justify him putting in the conversation that he's in.
Do you not have him as a top 10 point guard all time?
He's fringe if he is one.
Think about that for a second.
Damn.
Think about that for a second. He's a fringe top 10 point guard. So for a guy like John Stockton, let's take we're going to talk about we're going to bring numbers in it. But in addition to bringing the numbers in it, a guy like Stockton who played on both sides of the basketball at a high level, right? He played on both sides of the basketball at a high level and produced wins. We're talking about Stockton and Malone. I think they 500 games over 500 as a duo. I think they 500 games over 500. When they get in the playoffs, I don't have an explanation for the 89. I don't have not 8. Is it 88? 88 they were really good. 89 and 90, that's where it gets tricky. But after 90, I got no problem with everything that I saw from these dudes, right? 91 I think they ended up losing to the Warriors, but then 92 they in the Western Conference Championship. 93 I think they lose. Who did they lose to in 93? 94, they're in the Western Conference Championship. 95, they lose to the Rockets, who won the NBA Championship. 96, they're in the NBA Finals. 97, they're in the NBA Finals. 98, they're in the NBA Finals. And Stockton, being one of the premier point guards during that time, his numbers were comparable just as a distributor and as a playmaker. We're talking about a guy whose gravity. I think that we leave out the fact that the reason why Malone was as good as he was because Stockton's ability to stretch the defense, Stockton's ability to knock down mid-range shots, and to keep defenses honest. A lot of point guards weren't able to do that. Not only that, Stockton's ability defensively to head that attack, and not only head that attack, speed up their offense, and that generated a lot more offense for them in addition to what they was doing in the half court. So I don't have Stockton underrated. I think he's a top 5 point guard all time.
Ooh. Wait, but okay. So is Isaiah Thomas above him?
I have a difficult time putting Isaiah Thomas above him, but the separator with Isaiah is the fact that the separator with Isaiah is the championships. I think so.
So, but that's what I'm saying. So, by your logic, you can just sit there and say about Isaiah, I don't know about 85 or 86, but ever since then, though, 87 they lost to the Boston Celtics. 88, I believe they lost to the Boston Celtics. No, they made it to the finals in 88. 89, they made to the finals, and 90, they made to the finals, won both championships. And in 1991, they lost to the Chicago Bulls, who went on to win the championship. Right. Like, you can use the exact same logic for him if you're going to just sit here and exclude.
In 89, they only lost 2 games that whole playoff series, both to the Bulls.
Right.
They swept everybody else.
So again, I'm just saying, like, by that logic, you can also say the exact same thing. And in 87, again, they lost to the Boston Celtics of all teams.
In 7 games.
So, and it was 7 games. So by that logic, you can literally do the exact same thing with Isaiah Thomas. Plus, he has an MVP, Finals MVP, and 2 championships. You're going to argue the longevity. Without a doubt, Stockton's longevity is better. I would argue statistically.
Do you feel you knocked John Stockton because 1, his game was boring. 2, because if you watch the Jazz, all he did was what they asked him to do. Like he could score if needed. They didn't want him to do that. They didn't ask him to do that. And because there are more talented and skilled point guards, but who didn't produce as much. Like, do you knock him because of his style of play?
I just think there's other players who just accomplish more than him. And I understand what the stylistic. However, I would rather have a player out there who has the ability to make the decisions that are necessary on a possession to possession basis, not somebody who's just sitting there saying, my coach is telling me to do this, so this is what I'm primarily going to do, unless it's like a catastrophic situation where I'm like left wide open or something like that. So like, again,
you know that in the 80s and 90s, if you didn't do what your coach told you to do, you sat on the bench, right? It wasn't like today.
I think, but Isaiah Thomas somehow made his way to being a 20-point scorer as a point guard.
It was a different system. It was a different coach. It was a different style. Jerry Sloan was very different than Chuck Daly.
Well, not only that,
the setup of that team were Bill Laimbeer and
Vinny Johnson
and
what system?
Rodman, they weren't scoring. They were asking Dumars and Isaiah, hey, we need you to be both 20-point scorers. That's what we need from you. They asked him to do that. Whereas Sloan said, nuh-uh, slow it down, get it into the big man, get it into the post, get it into Malone, which is why he had so many damn turnovers. Look how many turnovers Malone had, because they were always forcing it into him when even sometimes they shouldn't be.
What system, what coach are you referring to outside of, I guess, Jerry Sloan that was so hell-bent on the system that he played that if you weren't doing well enough or you didn't do what I told you, I'll be willing to bench my star guard?
Almost every coach.
I just named the coach and you said I didn't apply to that.
No, I said Chuck Daly's was different. He didn't ask Isaiah Thomas not to score and to be John Stockton. He told him, I need you and Joe Dumars to score because our front court is focused on defense. They're not scorers. Rodman, Laimbeer, those aren't scorers. We need our backcourt to score. So I said it's a different system with a different coach. But almost every coach in those days was very much do what I say or you don't play.
Lo, you also leaving out the fact, Lo, that unit was built entirely around Isaiah Thomas. There's a reason why they had the number two pick in the 1981 draft. They were garbage, and they started that unit with Isaiah Thomas. When John Stockton
picked him after he said, "I refuse, I will not play in Detroit," and they said, "We don't care." Like they built that team to Chill's point around Isaiah. Sorry, keep going. Sorry,
they built that unit entirely around him. So when the Utah Jazz get John Stockton at the end in the beginning of the 84-85 season, they were the third seed the year before. So they were a good team. They basically integrated and switched up their whole style once they got John Stockton, and then they got Malone the next year. So it wasn't like when Stockton got Malone, he got Malone in year 6 or year 7 where he was already a 5-time All-Pro. No, those two guys together basically grew up. And not only did they grow up together, the system was built around Malone, Stockton and Malone. And Malone was the guy offensively. And Stockton was the guy who was he was the facilitator. He was basically the table setter. He was the guy who took care of all of that stuff, not just for Malone, but he was that guy for all of those guys. Jeff Malone, Brian Russell, when Brian Russell got on the crew later on, he was that guy for all of those guys. And he was the consummate lead guard.
The only reason why I bring up Isaiah Thomas is because of what he said himself. So Isaiah Thomas has been on record several different times saying how adjustments had to be made on a fly on a possession-to-possession basis. So even though, yes, there was a system set in place for them,
right?
Isaiah Thomas has sat there and said himself that he had to take it upon himself to know when to do it in the balance. The most difficult thing about being a point guard is understanding the balance of scoring and facilitating and understanding that and comprehending it. So I'm just going off of what Isaiah Thomas himself has said.
Which is fair, Lo.
It's true, but you got to be careful listening to Isaiah Thomas.
Fair enough.
Because in the same paragraph, he'll contradict himself.
Fair enough.
Which is also fair, but I'm having a difficult time believing the logic that Stockton was just a robot out there, and I'm just going to do everything that Jerry Sloan tells me to do, or do everything.
I'm not saying
he wasn't going to do that. I mean, Stockton absolutely went off script and did his thing. Stockton has plenty 20, 25, 18 games, 20 games, 2010 games. He was doing that only except. The reason why he didn't do it enough is because, number one, I think Magic was a better player. And I think that when you're dealing with guys like Isaiah Thomas, when you're dealing with lead guards at that time, you're dealing with guards that I have to defend. And when I got to defend, it kind of takes away slightly from my offense. Plus, I can't leave out the fact that I can't mention this enough to you, Lo. He was a part of a system where Malone was the guy. I am the table setter. I am the facilitator. My scoring is secondary. I can score and I will score when necessary, which he did. Because like I said, he's got plenty 20-10 games. He's got plenty 25-20 games. He's got plenty of those. But my job and my role was to get this guy, was to get this guy going. And that's what he did. And that was the consummate floor leader.
And that's fine. It's just that we got to pick a side. Are we going to say that the system that he played in is the reason why he was more in that way, which may have been a detriment to their team's success? But then also you cannot then ignore the fact that the same system is the reason why we've been having this conversation in the first place, because he benefited to the tune of which recording so many assists that he's leading it all time. So yes, was a system been detrimental to the success at time? Right. Absolutely. But he also benefited so much so that a player who has never won a championship, a player who's never been in an MVP conversation, a player who we're putting up against other all-time great players at his position who have accomplished those things plus statistical success, we're still having this conversation about him because of that exact same system, because that led to those numbers. It's the player choice way. Yeah, them boys don't get it started. The player choice way. Yeah, the player choice way. Come and switch lanes into the player choice way.